Hey guys, I am Tara Brown and I'm the lead pastor here at Northpoint Vineyard Church, and you are watching our Sunday morning message video. It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas. Actually, today it's not. I'm recording this on Thursday. It's like 40 degrees and foggy outside, but I am guessing that your schedule and your stress level are starting to feel like Christmas is coming, because it is. And with that, here's an update on Christmas events happening here at Northpoint. On Sunday, December 19th, we're going to be gathering together, not here, but in our new building for our Christmas movie night event. This is something that we've done almost every year that we've been a church. We gather together, throw our kids on the floor, bring pajamas and stuffed animals and blankets, and watch a Christmas movie. And so on this night, we're going to be meeting in our new facility, and we're going to watch The Grinch together. It should be fun. And we're also going to have during that event a separate hangout time for students. And so if you are a parent with a kid 5th grade through high school, we would love you to bring them out too, because our leaders are excited to have a time to connect with them, especially as we move into this new space. That whole night should be fun for everyone. So we would love to see as much of our church family come out for that event as possible. And then of course, we're also getting excited for our Christmas Eve service here at Northpoint. And this year that's going to be happening here in our Granger location. It'll be a special time as we celebrate our last Christmas in this facility that we have loved so well together. So come out and join us for our candlelight service on Friday, December 25th at 5 p.m. We would love to have you guys there. And like I mentioned, we are in the process of moving to a new space from Granger back to the South Bend area, and we are really excited about it. Closing is coming up just this next week. We take possession of the building at the end of the month, and then we will get ready to move. And here are a few dates that we would love to throw out for you guys. On January 9th, that's a Sunday after service, we're going to have another cleaning and packing and sorting day here at Northpoint, where we're going to get everything here ready to go there. We would love to have your help for that day. We'll do lunch and then get to work. So put that on your calendar. And then moving day is Saturday, January 22nd. That's going to start at 9 p.m. We have 2 different shifts that you can show up for that day, but we are excited to get moving on that Saturday to prepare for the next 2 services coming up. And then here's the last thing that you need to know about dates in January is that on January 23rd, we will celebrate our last Sunday here in this location. And during that Sunday, we're really going to be thanking God for 6 beautiful years of community and connection and fellowship and ministry here in this location, and be sharing about all of the good things that God has done in us and through us in this season. And then on Sunday, January 30th, we will make the move and have our first service in our new space, where we will celebrate all that God has done in this incredible season. That service will hopefully include worship and teaching and full kids programs for our little ones. We're really excited to bring our church family into our new church home. There are tons of ways to get involved in the next few months as we walk through this process together. Thank you, church, for being so wonderful and supportive during this time. We're really excited to be church with you. And with that, I'll throw out that one last reminder about tithes and offerings. Every week we say this. You guys do a wonderful job of supporting the ministry of your church, and we are humbled and honored to partner with you. You can continue to support the ministry here at Northpoint and to love and honor Jesus through your tithes and offerings. You can give online through our website or our Church Center app. You can also toss a check in the mail or drop it in the drop box the next time you're in service or in person for church services. Thank you guys for your faithfulness. Ministry is moving, and that's because you guys have been so faithful. So with that, a lot is going on. We'll transition into message time for today. We've been in a new series here at Northpoint called the InBetween Time, the already and not yet of Advent. And in this Advent season, the weeks preceding Christmas, when we wait for the arrival of Jesus, we really do kind of have the sense that we're in an in-between time. We are waiting for Jesus to come, but he hasn't yet. That happens on Christmas, right? except that he has come. We know that. That's why we do this thing. But still, somehow, we're still waiting. Christmas is this paradoxical, liminal, in-between time. It's this convergence of what is already, what we already have and have received, and the not yetness of knowing that more is to come. It's this reminder that both things are true, that we are waiting for the not yet of God to bring his kingdom in fullness to the place that we live. We are citizens in heaven, and we eagerly await a Savior from there, the Lord Jesus Christ. But at the same time, Jesus has come, and we get to experience his presence and his goodness in our lives. We live in both realities all of the time. And it's kind of this bittersweet spot, isn't it? We live life in the already and the not yet. We learned a new word to describe this kind of in-between time. It's called liminality. And liminality, we've said this every week, it's the state of transition between one stage and the next. It's those spaces and seasons in life when we find ourselves neither here nor there, when we're in transition between and betwixt, and the messy middle and the emotions that come with it. So over the last few weeks, we've talked about different ways we might encounter liminality in our lives. Sometimes liminality is a literal space. It's a place. A hallway is a liminal space between one destination and the next. An airport is a liminal space. A car ride is a liminal space. Sometimes liminality is a season that we walk through. Those teenage years are liminal in-between years. Empty nesting and the years leading up to it are an in-between time. Maybe you've experienced a shift in careers or callings or relationships. Maybe a long season of singleness has left you feeling liminal for a long time. But sometimes our liminal spaces aren't literal. Sometimes it's not a space or a place or a season, but sometimes it's something more abstract and internal. Sometimes our liminal space is actually all in our head. When we're thinking through really personal, internal ideas, I'm talking today about liminality of thought and even theology. Have you ever been in an in-between place in your thinking and your faith? We've mentioned over and over again that these liminal seasons can seem kind of scary. And I'd venture to say that this is one of the most unsettling places to be, an internal liminality. Let me give you an example. When Maggie, who's my youngest, was little, her favorite color was yellow. Anything and everything yellow. And it was kind of this like special season when every little girl would pick like pink or purple and princess. Maggie just wanted anything yellow. We would get her like the yellow jammies. She still has a yellow blankie. Look at this picture I'll show you of Maggie and her yellow leaf. Like, honestly, can you see? Have you ever seen a kid so happy? Well, sometime in the last few years, I remember asking Maggie what color she wanted for, I think, like a birthday party theme. And I was like, Maggie, we could go with yellow. It's your favorite color. And then with like a heavy heart, Maggie looked at me and she said, so earnestly, she said, Mama, yellow isn't my favorite color anymore. And she looked kind of distraught and like almost even tearful. And she said, I don't know what my favorite color is right now. She has grown out of this phase and now she's on to like much more grown-up kid colors. But I can still remember seeing like my little maybe 5-year-old and the internal conflict on her face. There was this tension. It was almost fear. Her favorite color wasn't yellow anymore, but she wasn't sure what her favorite color was. She was torn. She was torn. And I know it's a silly example. We're talking about favorite color here, but even in that situation, like emotions were peaked, right? And so imagine walking through a season of in-between with much more complicated and personal and sensitive and deeply seated issues on the table. What happens when your spiritual journey becomes a liminal journey? What happens when you realize that there's more nuance and complexity to issues that you once thought were simple black and white? What happens when you start to question the intentions or the motives of people who have led from the front in the faith traditions and religious systems that we're a part of? What happens when interactions and friendships with people who have wildly different opinions or experiences or perspectives than yours, like, start to leave you feeling like this pull towards, I don't know, compassion or increased understanding or love, when before you might have let yourself been cut off by judgment or rightness? What happens when events in the news start to prick your heart in a new way and open you up to like a world's worth of new questions and concerns about what we collectively even like live and think and do in our country, in our world? My guess is that the last few years have brought each of us to certain points of tension in our faith or in our thinking, and in at least an area or two. If you haven't asked yourself some difficult questions about your own personal faith in the last few years, you maybe have not been paying quite enough attention. And I can understand why we might not want to ask such questions. It's frightening to allow yourself to wander through a season of uncertainty or doubt or spiritual assessment. But today, I want to push into this question. How do we navigate in between times of faith, thought, and theology? What do we do when our spiritual journey becomes a liminal journey? And to do that, I want to look at a story from our Christmas account together. We've been walking through different passages that point to Jesus's arrival at Christmas time, and we're seeing that many of these moments have like a liminal feel. The people of Israel as they wait for the Messiah to come, or Mary knowing that her soul was going to be pierced by her son's life, right? In today's passage, we're going to see a similar theme. And we're actually going to look at the journey of the Magi, who were on a literal journey and in a liminal space. And they found Jesus on their way to find truth. So let's read this together from Matthew chapter 2. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where's the one who's been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, and we have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." Spoiler, that was a lie. After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star that they had seen when it rose ahead of them stopped over the place that the child was. And when they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. So this is the story of the Magi, or as we like to call it, the three wise men. And this is a story that honestly has been shrouded in mystery. There's very little that we know outside of this passage about who these people were or exactly what they were doing. There are scholars who insist that this section of Jesus's story, maybe most of Jesus's story, was a myth. And that these guys maybe were just added to spice things up. But for you and me, we're going to keep these characters in our nativity scene because there's something special that we can learn from their searching. Now, here's what we know about them from this passage. We know that they weren't kings, no matter what the Christmas song might like to tell us. There's no information like that in this passage. We don't know how many of them there were. What we know is that there was more than one, because the word's plural. There could have been 2, there could have been 20. We don't know, and that's not necessarily important. What we do know is that they were magi. And magi is a word used like in the standard Greek lexicon, defined as a magician, essentially, a sorcerer, maybe and probably some kind of pagan priest. We don't really know. What we know is that these men could have had expertise in some kinds of the magical arts, maybe interpretation of dreams or astrology. And we know from the scripture that they were looking to the stars. The very first verses of this section tell us that. It says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, where's the one who's been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, and we've come to worship him. So maybe these men were astrologers or astronomers, and they believed that the heavens had some kind of influence and interaction with humanity. They had likely spent a great deal of time and even a great deal of money to try to understand what the movements of the heavens meant for life on earth. But the truth is that their journey towards Jesus likely didn't start with the Messiah in mind. These men were magi, not rabbi, and while there were some mystics in the Jewish tradition, it's not likely that these men were followers of the God of Israel. They were probably open-minded and on an open-ended journey, having read enough prophecies and promises about a king who had his very own star. And that's something that might be worthy of our worship. So we know that these guys were studying the stars in hopes to find something special and something they had seen or studied or found in the sky or ascertained from ancient writings pointed them in Jesus's direction. And it's interesting, isn't it, that this group of individuals got an invitation to this celestial event, right? But of all of the people who could have been invited to experience the birth of the Messiah, it was a group of secular scientists or mystical magicians who came not with some sense of like certainty or faith about what they would find, but with some sense of like awe and wonder and intrigue. And in all of that, they got to see Jesus. But we know this, don't we? We know that throughout the biblical narrative, like God invited question askers and truth seekers and even naysayers into conversation and relationship. In our last series, it was called The God Who Speaks, we talked about how God speaks to us, but also about how he invites us to speak, specifically how God invites us to come to him with our questions, our wonderings, our challenges, even our opinions, how God gave us a unique voice, a unique personal point of view. Jacob wrestled with God. Job lamented at him. Nicodemus was curious, even skeptical. Thomas doubted, but still got to touch Jesus's hands. Like, we know that there's room at the table for people with questions and doubts and even disbelief. We know that. But it's another story, isn't it? when you find yourself in that liminal space. It's one thing to make room for Magi at the manger, but it's another thing to make room in our own expanding and evolving faith for our own doubts and fears and insecurities and questions, just like Maggie, when like tears were forming in her eyes because she couldn't quite wrap her head around what her favorite color should be. When we start to ask questions of our own, it can be a frightening thing. About 10 years ago, I was having coffee with a mentor of mine here in town. We had both been leading in the same church for years together. And we had both kind of separate from each other, found ourselves in a liminal space, asking questions that we hadn't really asked out loud yet. I was starting to study and see scriptures in a different way, specifically around the role of women in leadership, seeing so many ways that the scriptures had kind of been used specifically to point people in certain directions, even misused. Right? And so I'm starting to ask questions like, if the scriptures can be used to subjugate women, like how else might scriptures have been misused throughout history to form something like that's now misshapen, right? But little did I know that my friend at the same time was reading about grace and the power of the gospel and the goodness of God and the freedom that comes if we can just see God's love for what it might be and could be, dusting some dust off of scriptures that have painted God in a specific light and seeing him with new clarity. And so here we were in very different places, but certainly both in liminal spaces, beginning to ask each other questions and kind of like tiptoeing around the subject, right? There was at least a little bit of fear in the room because here we were like leaders in the church. And we were starting to wonder about the direction of the church. When I say that, I mean like big church, not specifically. But I can still remember looking at my friend in like the upstairs section of a Martin's Deli and saying something with like, heart palpitations, like, I'm starting to wonder if maybe the church doesn't have the whole story, right? This conversation has been happening in the broader evangelical movement for years now. Maybe you've heard the word deconstruction applied to individuals who are questioning practices and paradigms that we've left unchallenged in many or most of our religious places and spaces. Deconstruction, right? Tearing something down, demolishing or remodeling a thing. It's a word that's often scoffed at by church leaders and lumped in with like spiritual rebellion, or even labeled as like millennial clickbait. But there is part of our story, and I say our story because it is ours. And by that, I mean the collective American church. There are parts of our story that do need to be challenged or even shaken, and certainly some things that could stand to be bulldozed to the ground. Seeing how the church has commodified the gospel with book deals and mega churches and celebrity pastors with really cool shoes and questionable character. Seeing how the church has protected and preferred certain people or political platforms while allowing certain adherents to eat each other alive across the aisle. I think there's some fear, some sense that if people start deconstructing or demolishing things, that they'll fail to build them back up around Jesus. And that's a valid fear, right? Many people in recent years have been so hurt by what they've seen or experienced within our Christian movement that they've like stepped away or relented or just thrown in the towel on this thing that we call faith. Maybe they've moved away because these questions are not easy to answer or obvious to sort out. But I don't know that Jesus was fearful or hesitant towards this kind of question asking. In fact, I think Jesus participated in this kind of question asking. How many times did Jesus bring a new teaching in response to an old one and say, I have not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it? Here's the truth. God invited question askers and truth seekers to his son's arrival because we are invited to be question askers and truth seekers. And the second that we stop asking questions and seeking truth, we run the risk of falling into complacent cultural Christianity, where we accept any truth as long as someone tells us that it's true. And not because God has revealed it to us or because we've discerned it for ourselves or as part of a faith community, but because it's the way things have always been and gone and done and seemed. But this kind of question asking, this kind of constant discernment is actually the thing that we are called to. Let me read you this section of scripture that the Apostle Paul sent to his student Timothy. He said, "In the presence of God and of Jesus Christ, who will judge the living and the dead, and in view of his appearing in his kingdom, I give you this charge. This is your job, your duty, your responsibility. Preach the word. Be prepared in season and out of season. Correct, rebuke, and encourage with great patience and careful instruction. For the time will come when people will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. They will turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to myths. But you, keep your head in all situations. Endure hardship. Do the work of an evangelist. Discharge all the duties of your ministry." Paul is telling Timothy, as a leader, as a follower of Jesus, to be a question asker and a truth seeker. Now, do you know how many times I've heard this passage preached as a warning against, the slippery slope of progressivism and secular teachings? But I've never heard it as a warning against the dangers of fundamentalism or Christian nationalism. I've never heard it as a charge to each of us to continue in our pursuit of truth, even as we walk through the faith that we've held onto, always as a warning of the dangers of the world coming at us. But God invited us to be question askers and truth seekers, to come with book in hand to discern the way that the world works, right? God invited us into liminal spaces because, like we've said so many times during this series, the uncertainty of a liminal season can surely feel frightening, but it can also be marked with absolute excitement. God can meet us so powerfully in liminal spaces because it's during those times, especially liminal seasons of thought and theology, where we might give God permission to move things that might need to be moved. Man, we can meet him and experience him there, and he can lead us into greater revelation and understanding and a truer place of truth. And so with that, I know it still kind of feels like this terrifying prospect, opening ourselves up in these really personal spaces. I want to give you 3 things to carry with you. If you find yourself in a liminal space, emotionally, spiritually, or even theologically, 3 things that I want you to hold, okay? First, let Jesus inform your view of God. Let Jesus inform your view of God. In whatever searching you might do in your life, as you journey in faith towards God, please let your understanding of who God is be formed around who Jesus is. Please. Do you ever have one of those moments of existential insomnia, right? Where you lie awake at night thinking about all of the things. I had one of these just within the last few weeks when I felt overwhelmed and uncertain about just about everything. I'm telling you, it was a bit of a mess. I was wondering if I was really competent at anything. I was wondering if there was anything I could really trust or rely on. What am I doing, and does what I'm doing make a difference or matter in the world? Even, I will tell you, for a few brief moments, God seemed vague. And I allowed myself, for maybe 30 seconds, to kind of float a bit and feel unmoored. Like, God, I can't really see you or hear you or feel you, and maybe you are just an idea out there. Am I allowed to tell you these things? But then I will tell you, as I laid there in bed, letting like my thoughts kind of float out in front of me, one thing was solid. Then do you know what it was? It was Jesus. It was Jesus. And it was like a thing I could grab. As all of my thoughts were kind of swirling around me, all it took was Jesus, right? Jesus. Jesus is the choice that I make. And here's the truth. I don't follow Jesus because I have all of the answers and they point to him. I don't follow Jesus because a star in the sky pointed me in his direction. I follow Jesus because I have experienced Jesus. And that was everything. And that was enough. Listen, I don't love my husband because he's empirically perfect for me. I love him because I love him. And because my heart chose his heart. I choose Jesus, and I let Jesus inform my understanding of who God is and what kind of relationship I can have with him. And here's the truth. God chose Jesus too. God chose Jesus too. Colossians 1:19-20 says, "For God was pleased to have all of his fullness dwell in him," that's Jesus, "and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross." When God wanted to make himself known to the universe, he chose Jesus. And so if you are wondering or wandering, please choose Jesus and let him inform your idea of God. If you want to know what God is like, look to the life of Jesus. There's your answer. The next thing that I want to hand to you is this. Please let the Bible inform your view of the world. Again, this is a choice that I make. It's a way we choose to live our lives by letting God's book be our source of guidance and insight and wisdom and worldview. Letting this book inform the questions that we might come across when we start to ask questions about justice or gender or marriage or leadership. We go to the book that God gave us, and we seek our perspective there. I'm telling you, it's been heavy on my heart lately. If there's one thing I could teach my children, it would be to love and learn this book and to let it guide their lives. So please, as you walk through in-between seasons in your faith, let the Bible be the thing that guides you and let it inform your view of the world. And while you do that, and this is so important, let Jesus inform your view of the Bible. When we read this book, we have to read it in light of Jesus as the one who fulfilled all of it. Jesus is the context with which we read the scriptures, the life that he lived and the principles that he shared and the way he interacted with others. We learn from the way that Jesus lived, and we shape our understanding of the Bible and therefore our understanding of the world through that perspective. So in all of this, right? Let Jesus inform your view of God. Let the Bible inform your view of the world. Let Jesus inform your view of the Bible. What does it all come down to? It really comes back to Jesus. Of course, it comes back to Jesus. I had a conversation a few months back with a friend who's on a liminal journey. They're in that in-between space, asking questions about perspectives and opinions, and what the Bible might say, and life choices, a lot of things. They are in between. And there are plenty of people in their lives who are not pleased with the very conversation, let alone the direction that it may lead. But my advice to this friend of mine in this liminal season was this: please take Jesus with you. Please take Jesus with you. And I said, there are going to be people who say that you can't take Jesus into this place, that you can't ask him those questions. You certainly can't tell him those answers. You can't share those parts of yourself with Jesus. No, if you go there, Jesus doesn't go with you. And so I just kept saying, please take Jesus with you. While you ask those questions and while you look for those answers, will you please just take Jesus with you and trust that he will go with you and can guide you and can hold your hand and can speak to you because he loves you? Will you please take Jesus with you? Please take Jesus with you. And my prayer for you would be the same, friends, that wherever you go, on this journey with God, as you ask questions or as you shift in perspectives, as you continue to seek the truth, that you would go into those places with Jesus, that you wouldn't be afraid to share your opinions or ask your questions, but that you would go with him and you would let him guide you. This is the reminder that we have in this story, that God invited the question askers and the truth seekers. We have this reminder that Jesus came for us because of his great love for us, and because of our great love for him, we turn our hearts into his direction. A.W. Tozer was the one who said, to have found God and still to pursue him is the soul's paradox of love. This is the Advent story, that we are seeking Jesus, waiting for him, even while we know that he's here. We are still pursuing him through love. And so, friends, this week, no matter where you may go, no matter what questions you might ask, I pray that you would go into those places with Jesus. Hey, we love you and we are praying for you. We hope to see you guys soon. We would love to spend Christmas with you guys. But until we do see you again, know that you're loved, and go with Jesus. Love you guys.